Lesson 6. Oil versus acrylic paint and the Romani art. This presentation has been prepared as part of project Boosting Positive Narrative on Romani Integration through Arts. If you are just getting started, keep in mind that a good painting begins with solid drawing skills. Having a good drawing foundation is simply the greatest guarantee of success in the realm of painting, whether you are using oil paint or acrylics. What is oil paint? The first primary difference that sets oils apart from the other mediums is their consistency and texture. Oil paints are very thick and oily. They are made with binding agents, color pigments, and an oil base. Usually, the base of this type of paint is a natural oil such as linseed or safflower. This is what gives oil paints their smooth and creamy consistency, making them ideal for different surfaces and projects. The oil base is also what keeps oils wet for longer. Painting oil over acrylic is also an option to add more layers and texture to your work. When working with oils, you do need to make use of a paint medium or thinner. These add fluidity to your paints, making them more workable, as well as adding a protective gloss or sheen. Most oil paint mediums are solvents and are toxic, which means they can be harmful to the skin, eyes, and airways. There are also safer medium options, such as natural painting oils that can be used instead of turpentine and other paint strippers and thinners. Oils are also a messier medium, given that they cannot be cleaned up with soap and water. If oils splash onto your clothing or other fabrics, they are likely to stain. Oil paints are primarily used on canvas or thicker boards, but they can also be used on wood, certain metals, and ceramics. Because of their oily base, these paints work best when using a primer as a base coat. This assists your oils in better adhering to the surface, giving you a longer lasting paint job. Acrylics are made much the same way as oils, except without the oil base. They are water-based and therefore they are also much safer to use. Using acrylic mediums, such as flow enhancer, can also enhance color mixing and blending techniques, making your paints move as oils would. Certain acrylic paint mediums, such as retarder and acrylic glazing liquid, will slow down your dry time if you are working on a large project. Most acrylics can also be reactivated and work on long after they are dry by using a little water or an acrylic paint medium. The liquids will allow the paint to become workable, and you can then add more color or layers. When using acrylics, it is important to use a fixative or sealant on them to prevent your paint chipping and peeling in the future. There are acrylic-specific sealants or varnish options in different, such as matte or supergloss to choose from. The best part about using acrylic paints is that they come off very easily. By using some soapy water, you can wipe up or wash out any painting accidents. Acrylics can be used for painting and different craft projects. Because they dry so quickly, acrylics are suitable for use on paper, canvas, wood, glass, and even ceramics. If you plan on doing an outdoor project, be sure to get a special outdoor acrylic paint, as this will have better longevity against outside conditions. The following are some of the advantages and disadvantages of using oil paint versus acrylic paint. The drying time. The major difference between oils and acrylics is the time it takes for them to dry. Acrylic paint dries in about an hour, if not 15 minutes, depending on the humidity and temperature of your location. Oil paints might stay wet for days or weeks. Mixing paint. Because acrylics are already beginning to dry, mixing acrylics is harder than mixing oils. You can combine colors for days on end with oils, resulting in subtle color shifts that you won't be able to achieve with acrylics. Cleanup and toxicity. After painting with acrylics, you need to clean your brushes immediately because the bristles will be full of dry paint within a half hour. Acrylic paint, on the other hand, may be cleaned with plain water. Longevity. All paints can discolor with age if not properly cared for, whereas acrylics don't appear to do so, though we don't know for sure because acrylics haven't been around long enough. Color. All paints contain more pigment, resulting in richer, more vibrant colors. Acrylic colors might deepen somewhat as they dry, so the color you mixed may not be the same as the one that appears on the canvas. Cost. Acrylic painting supplies are more expensive than oil painting supplies. As an added bonus, acrylic paints may be used two ways, straight from the tube, like oils, or diluted with water, which allows you to utilize them in a whole other way, almost like watercolors. Roma as inspiration to famous painters. The construction of Roma identity is heavily influenced by cultural representations. For centuries, Roma people have been the victims of exclusively non-Roma representations. We are witnessing the development of Roma awareness, a situation in which successful, rich, and well-educated Roma proudly identify their origin rather than choose for assimilation and the loss of their cultural legacy as a new generation of Roma intellectuals emerges. The Roma visual products are described in the cultural classification using terms that experts think are positive, such as naive, barbarian, primal, primordial, archetypal, and autodidactic. Roma artists had little opportunity to experiment with new techniques, and they could only exhibit their work at community centers, which seems to be on the outside of the cultural conversation. In terms of numbers, therefore, the Louvre houses 15 works, most of which are on display and which are spread out over a timeline running from the 15th century to the 19th century. Bohemians, gypsies, fortune tellers, travelers, and musicians can be found in them. But who could say that they can see Roma, Sinti, Calais, or Lovari in them? In the Great Holy Family by Raphael Santi, Raphael, it should be noted that Saint Elizabeth has a serious expression. She knows the sacrifice and suffering that her son and Jesus will endure for their faith. She has the power to see into the future, an ability attributed to Romani women of the time. She is therefore depicted with a dark complexion and more angular features, and her hair is tied up in a striped turban in the Roma style. Other women are found in numerous scenes from the 15th and the 16th centuries, such as Saint Anne and the Virgins with Child, dressed in a similar way or with a flat head, also typical of gypsy women. This is the case with Boccaccio, Dell'Abate, Correggio, Ansaldo, Mantegna, and Tizian. The Fortune Teller is a painting by Michelangelo, an Italian Baroque artist. A gypsy girl reads the palm of a foppishly dressed boy in the artwork. However, the clever gypsy woman is deceitful. Her seductive grin is a ruse, and because the young guy has been swept off his feet by her beauty, he fails to see that she has slid the ring from his finger in the meantime. Two phenomena relating to the treatment of Romani figures developed in the 17th century. On the one hand, there was the use of non-Romani models and fictitious Bohemians in custom. thus affirming the disembodiment of a being in the Romani world and the disembodiment of the individual. On the other hand, there was their inclusion in a particular relationship with the idea of nature during the century of the Enlightenment. In France, from the mid-17th century onwards, the dismantling of the social structure of the great Bohemian companies placed the fantastical Bohemian in an artificial relationship with the latter. In the 18th century, it is the model dressed up as a gypsy that is developed into a constructed nature. This marginal geography where the Bohemian or gypsy is kept subtense as tense that is moral, ideological, and poetic at the same time. One can easily feel sad when faced with Zingara with the bass tambourine by Camille. A profound melancholy overwhelms anyone who stops to look at this face. Some may feel the nostalgia of youth are transcribed by a painter whose death was near, or the weight of 7 centuries of epistemicide in a total absence of being, which is nonetheless supposed to evoke something of the Roma people and of Romani women. This young model, whose regard strives to appear innocent and yet is hardly innocent at all, this young girl whose tambourine is meant to ethnicize her, has the dignified eroticism of all the stereotypes of prosper Mérimée relating to gypsy women. The Romani motif first appeared in the visual arts such as painting, engraving, and sculpture in the 19th century. Many foreign painters traveled to Spain in order to capture the Roma and their culture. The Roma are no longer background characters, but rather protagonists. The Roma is viewed as original, unaltered individuals who represent authenticity, which will be the most appealing aspect for romantic and consumerism artists. The majority of artists depicted Roma folkloric characteristics and continually expanded them. Male and female Romani models were also identified during this time, and eyewitnesses were present. Many Roma prints, notably outfit samples, were used to illustrate anthropological texts. A lot of Spanish painters used the Roma as aesthetic reason in their work, and many of their works depicted them. They portrayed the Roma in a modern light and in accordance with current artistic trends, the late 19th and early 20th centuries. One of them is Isidre Nunel, who is known for his emotive depiction of socially marginalized characters in the late 19th century in Barcelona. The Roma and 20th century art remained linked. The Romani were depicted in ways that were not familiar to the public. Romani were also used by the avant-garde to experiment with new techniques and aesthetic conceptions. The image of the Roma as victims of Nazi persecution and extermination grew stronger after the Second World War and throughout the 20th century. Picasso, Dalí, Matisse, and plenty of other notable painters all played an important role. The most important and astonishing aspect of the Roma and the visual arts today is that the Roma are the artists. Non-Roma artists, of course, continue to exploit Roma as a motif in admirable ways. Romani artists can be found in all countries where there are Romani all over the world. These Roma are talented artists who wish to share and contribute their artistic perspective, which has been suppressed for generations. Roma artists have participated in a number of international contemporary art exhibitions. Roma art was entirely examined by non-Roma specialists who deemed it obsolete, simply illustrative, or at best nostalgic, and thus removed it from the official canon. Roma artists had little opportunities to experiment with new techniques, and they could only show their work at community centers, which seemed to be on the outside of the cultural conversation. When Roma artists demanded recognition as a collective, their works were consigned to the status of collective, folk, and popular, manifestation of Roma culture, of exotic Roma object, and if the artists were not restricted to anonymity, their future was circumscribed by being presented for more than 3 decades in marginal institutions that lacked the necessary infrastructure for creation and exhibition. Recognizing their ethnicity and cultural history is still a double-edged sword for Roma artists. However, a growing public debate over Roma identity and representation, as well as the presence of Roma specialists, has begun to deconstruct this complex system of cultural oppression. The new generation of Roma art has produced a plethora of fascinating cultural manifestations. Several Romani painters have earned distinctions for their work and have participated in exhibitions and galleries worldwide. One of them is Damien Lebas. He was born in the United Kingdom in 1963 and was a strong fighter of the Roma Revolution in art. Lebas lived and worked in West Sussex when his wife, who was also a Romani artist. He was a graduate from the Royal College of Art and the initiator of the Roma Biennale, while he has exhibited in major art galleries across the world. There is the same depth of narrative in the Damien's paintings, but the stories are not made up by us, but rather journeys through the labyrinths of his crossing universes, actual adventures that will not fade away like a fading fire, but will capture eternally clashes of people, ideas, and culture. Gabi Jimenez. He was born in 1964 and since 2004 he has played an active role in the circulation of international contemporary art. He is currently living in France and remains active in political and community activism, supporting the rights of Roma. His canvases are crisscrossed with bright and vivid colors, with lines outlined in black depicting the culture of travelers, without ever reducing it to simple cliches. Behind the swarm of details and joy that emanate at first glance, however, hides a whole other truth, that of a gloomy story made up of discrimination, violence, hatred, and expulsions. Ceea Stoica. She was an Austrian Romani painter, musician, writer, and who survived from the Holocaust. Cea's father was sent to Dachau in 1941 and never returned. In 1943, her family was sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau II, where most of her relatives perished. Shea was released from prison, but the topic of witnessing has resurfaced in her work since she began working in 1989. At the age of 56, she started painting using unconventional materials, such as her fingers or toothpicks. Combining German expressionism and folk art, her work portrays the death camps and scenes of family life in their painted wagon prior to the Holocaust. Her artwork has been featured in exhibitions in Europe, Japan, and the United States. Stoica's last exhibition, Leben, took place at the Jewish Museum of Vienna from January to March 2005. Ferdinand Kochi. He has been captivated with the need to create since he was a youngster. He was born into a Romani family in a communist Albanian region, and he turned to art to escape the daily conflicts between socialist equality and long-standing marginalization. Whatever he was meant to be doing, whether it was in the fields at home or at school, he began drawing on scraps of paper with pencil or charcoal, or on the ground with a stick if nothing else was available. The inspiration for Koji's work comes from his own life. First, the Albanian countryside, with peasants and Roma who evoke cliches but are, in this case, the genuine things as seen from within their own culture but characterized by his artistic training. As he became the most desired object of political exploitation, the token minority member with actual talent, his work was taken up for use in a variety of causes. Teresa Orsus. She was born and raised in Komló, Hungary, in 1956, coming from a family with 15 children. She started drawing since she was a child and has gained the first prize at the National Children's Drawing Contest. The creative period ended when she was 14 because, as she says, love came knocking on her door. She did not paint until the age of 19, when she started setting up adults' creative workshops. She took part at the National Exhibition of Self-Taught Artists, while she learned that what she was doing may be valuable. Orsus' works were very well received by the general audience, while professional critics prized her the most. Her paintings, on the other hand, are unlikely anything else in modern Moments art or contemporary art. They are outrage, furious, political, and investigative testimony to the injustice that women and Roma face, as well as pleas to eliminate prejudice and violence. And now our next task is to get started with acrylic painting.